The snow fell heavy outside Cooper's Corner Diner. It was the worst snowstorm to hit the small town of Pineville in 20 years. Most businesses on Main Street had closed early, their owners rushing home before the roads became too dangerous. But James Cooper was not like most business owners. James stood behind the counter of his diner, wiping the same spot he had cleaned 5 times already. The large wall clock showed 8:30 p.m. Outside, the wind howled and threw snow against the windows. The diner was empty. No customers had come in for the past 2 hours, but James would not close early. Not today, not ever. A place people can count on, his father had told him when they first opened the diner 15 years ago. His father was gone now, but James still lived by those words. The diner was warm and bright against the dark, cold night. The smell of fresh coffee and apple pie filled the air. James had just baked the pies more out of habit than need. Who would come for pie in this weather? Still, the familiar routine gave him comfort as the storm raged outside. The radio on the shelf behind the counter crackled with the latest weather update. The National Weather Service has issued a severe weather warning for Pineville and surrounding counties. Expect up to 3 feet of snow by morning. All roads will be closed until further notice. Please stay indoors. James sighed. Maybe he should close up after all. Even he couldn't remember a storm this bad. He was about to turn off the big neon open sign when he heard it. The distant rumble of engines fighting against the storm. The sound grew louder, then stopped. Through the frosted windows, James could make out shapes moving in the swirling snow. The bell above the door jingled as it opened, letting in a blast of cold air and a large man covered in snow. His face was red from the cold, his thick beard frozen with ice. He wore a heavy leather jacket with patches that James couldn't make out. "Thank God you're open," the man said, his voice rough and tired. He stamped his boots on the welcome mat, shaking off snow. "Didn't think we'd find anything in this weather." James nodded. "Coffee?" he asked simply. "Coffee would be heaven," the man replied. "But I've got friends outside. Our bikes couldn't make it any further in this snow." We slid, off the road about a mile back. James looked past the man to the window. Now he could see them, dark shapes huddled together in the parking lot, motorcycles partially covered in snow. "How many?" James asked, already reaching for mugs. 10 of us total. We were on our way back from a charity event in Springfield when the storm hit. Forecast said it wouldn't get bad until tomorrow. "Well, it got bad today," James said. "Bring them in, nobody should be out in this." The big man looked at James with surprise, then gratitude. "Name's Bear," he said, extending a gloved hand. "James Cooper," James replied, shaking it firmly. "This is my place." Bear turned and pushed the door open, waving to his friends. James moved quickly to the kitchen, putting on a large pot of his strongest coffee. He checked his supplies. He had enough food to feed at least 20 people. His grandmother had always told him to be prepared for unexpected guests. The bell jingled again and again as the bikers filed in, stomping snow from their boots and removing their helmets. They were a rough-looking group, men and women with tattoos, leather, and weathered faces. But James saw beyond that. He saw people who were cold, tired, and in need of help. "Take any seat you want," he called out. "Coffee's coming right up. And I've got hot food too." The bikers looked around, the warm diner with relief in their eyes. They settled into booths and chairs, their voices low as they talked among themselves. Some rubbed their hands together to get feeling back into frozen fingers. James brought out a tray of coffee mugs, setting them down on the counter. "Help yourselves," he said. "Cream and sugar are there. I'll have some food ready in 15 minutes. Bear approached the counter again. "We appreciate this more than you know," he said. "Not everyone would be so quick to welcome a bunch of bikers." James shrugged. "My grandmother taught me to judge people by how they act, not how they look. And right now, you're just folks caught in a bad storm." While the bikers warmed up with coffee, James worked in the kitchen. He had made his famous beef stew yesterday, thick with vegetables and tender meat. It would be perfect for a night like this. He put a large pot on the stove to heat and started mixing cornbread batter. His father's recipe, simple but delicious. As he worked, he could hear the bikers talking. Their voices grew louder as they warmed up, more relaxed. He heard laughter, stories about their charity ride, concerns about their bikes left in the snow. The radio continued to report on the storm. All emergency services are responding to multiple accidents on Highway 16. Please stay off the roads, unless absolutely necessary. James carried out bowls of steaming stew and baskets of hot cornbread. The smell filled the diner, and the bikers turned to look with hungry eyes. "Eat up," James said. "Plenty more where that came from." They didn't need to be told twice. The diner filled with the sounds of spoons against bowls and appreciative murmurs. James went from table to table, refilling coffee cups. A woman with silver streaks in her dark hair stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. "Why are you still open in this weather?" she asked. "You must have known no one would be out tonight." James thought about it. "I guess I just believe in being reliable," he said. "My father always said, be the person others can count on, especially when times are hard. So I stay open," Bear overheard from the next booth. "Well, we're mighty glad you do. If you'd closed early like everyone else, we might be freezing to death out there right now." As the night wore on, the storm grew worse. The wind rattled the windows and the snow piled higher. James turned on the small TV behind the counter to check the news. The reporter stood in blowing snow, saying all roads were now officially closed. No travel would be possible until plows could clear them, which wouldn't be until morning at the earliest. James looked at his unexpected guests. They had finished eating and were looking worried as they watched the news. "Looks like you folks are stuck here for the night," James said. "Lucky for you, I've got a storage room with some cots. Used to keep them for truckers who needed a rest during bad weather. They're not fancy, but they're better than trying to go anywhere tonight." The bikers exchanged glances. "We can't impose like that," Bear said, though his eyes showed relief at the offer. "It's not imposing if I'm offering," James replied. "Besides, where else would you go? The motel down the road is closed for renovations, and everything else is at least 10 miles away." A younger biker with a red bandana spoke up. "We can pay you for the food and the place to stay," James waved his hand. "We'll sort all that out tomorrow. For now, let's just get you folks comfortable for the night." As the storm continued to rage outside, James showed his guests to the back storage room. It was clean and warm, with enough space for the cots he kept stacked against the wall. Together they set them up in rows. "Bathrooms through that door," James pointed. "There's extra blankets in that cabinet. Make yourselves at home. I'll be out front if you need anything." Bear hung back as the others settled in. "You know, most people see bikers and think the worst," he said quietly. "But you opened your doors without hesitation." James looked at the man, seeing the honesty in his eyes. "My father used to say that kindness costs nothing but means everything, especially when it comes unexpected." Outside, the snow continued to fall, burying the town in white. But inside Cooper's Corner there was warmth, food, and the beginning of an unexpected friendship between a diner owner and 10 stranded bikers. Morning came with bright sunshine that made the snow-covered world outside sparkle like diamonds. James had stayed up most of the night, dozing in short naps on the chair behind the counter. He wanted to be available if any of his guests needed anything. At 5 in the morning, his usual waking time, James quietly began his daily routine. He started the large coffee maker, its gentle gurgling a familiar comfort. Then he mixed batter for pancakes, his special recipe with a hint of cinnamon and vanilla. The smell of bacon soon filled the air as strips sizzled on the grill. Bear was the first biker to wake up. He walked into the main diner area, his hair messy from sleep, but his eyes clearer than the night before. "You're up early," Bear said, noticing James working in the kitchen. "Same time every day," James replied with a small smile. "Habit of 15 years." Bear looked outside at the transformed world. The storm had passed, leaving behind a peaceful scene of unbroken white. The snow was piled high, at least 3 feet deep in some places. Their motorcycles were just mounds of white in the parking lot. "That's a lot of snow," Bear said, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like it." James nodded as he flipped pancakes. Worst storm in 20 years, according to the radio. Road crews should start clearing the main highway soon. Might take until afternoon before you folks can get moving again. By 6:30, all 10 bikers were awake. They filed into the diner area, looking rested but concerned about their situation. James served them a hearty breakfast: golden pancakes, crispy bacon, scrambled eggs, and hot coffee. The mood was lighter than the night before, with more talking, and even some laughter as they shared stories over breakfast. A woman named Rosa, with short gray hair and kind eyes, helped James carry plates to the tables. "This is the best breakfast I've had in years," she told him. "Did you learn to cook from your father?" "My grandmother, actually," James said as he poured more coffee. "She ran a small restaurant back in Alabama. Taught me everything I know about cooking and about treating people right." The younger biker with the red bandana, his name was Mike, was looking at the photos on the diner walls. There were pictures of James with his father when they first opened the diner, old black and white photos of his grandparents, and many snapshots of regular customers over the years. "You built this place with your dad?" Mike asked, pointing to one photo. James nodded. "Started from nothing. Dad worked 2 jobs to save enough money. We opened on my 25th birthday. He passed away 5 years ago, but I've kept everything the same, just how he liked it." Bear joined them, looking at the photos. "It's a good place, feels like home." "That's the idea," James said. "Dad always wanted a place where everyone felt welcome." After breakfast, the local news came on the small TV. The reporter stood on Main Street showing how the plows were finally clearing the roads. "Highway 16 should be open by noon," the reporter said. "But local roads may take longer. Authorities are asking people to stay home if possible." Bear looked at his fellow bikers. "As soon as the roads are clear enough, we need to get those bikes dug out and see if they'll start. Might need a mechanic if the engines are frozen." James thought for a moment. "My cousin Dave runs the garage 2 blocks down. Once the sidewalks are passable, I can call him. He's good with motorcycles." "That would be a big help," Bear said gratefully. By 10 o'clock, the sun had risen higher and its warmth was already starting to melt some of the snow. James and the bikers stood at the windows watching as the first plow came down the street, in front of the diner, pushing aside huge mounds of snow. "Time to dig out," Bear announced. James went to a closet and brought out shovels. "Not enough for everyone, but we can take turns." The bikers, James, and even some locals who had walked to the diner once they saw it was open all pitched in. They formed a line, passing shovels back and forth, working together to clear the parking lot. James turned on the radio, and music played through the speakers he had installed outside for summer days. The work was hard, but the mood was light as they made progress. By noon, they had cleared paths to each motorcycle and around them. Dave, James's cousin, trudged through the snow to reach them. He was a big man with hands rough from years of mechanical work. "Heard you got some bikes that need checking," Dave said, looking at the snow-covered motorcycles. Bear shook Dave's hand. "They got pretty cold last night, not sure if they'll start." Dave nodded. "Let's take a look." For the next hour, Dave checked each motorcycle. Some needed their batteries warmed. Others had moisture in places it shouldn't be. One by one, they got the bikes running again, their engines breaking the quiet of the snow-covered town. Inside the diner, James prepared lunch for everyone. Hot soup and sandwiches. The bikers came in and out, warming up before going back to work on their motorcycles. A local reporter who had been covering the storm cleanup noticed the activity at Cooper's Corner. She walked over, camera in hand. "Mind if I ask what's going on here?" she asked James. "Not every day we see 10 motorcycles at a diner in the middle of winter." James explained how the bikers had been caught in the storm and stayed the night. The reporter seemed interested and asked if she could take some pictures and interview a few people. Bear agreed, and soon the story of how the diner owner had helped the stranded bikers was being recorded. "What made you stop and help them?" the reporter asked James. "Many businesses closed early because of the storm." James thought about it. "It was the right thing to do. My father and grandmother taught me that we're all just people trying to make our way. Sometimes we need help, sometimes we give help. That's how community works." By mid-afternoon, all the motorcycles were running. The main roads had been cleared enough for travel, though they were still advised to ride carefully. The bikers gathered in the diner for a final cup of coffee before leaving. Bear approached James at the counter. "We need to settle up. What do we owe you for the food and shelter?" James waved his hand. "No charge for the shelter, food's on the regular menu price." He handed Bear a bill that was much lower than what they had actually eaten. Bear looked at it and frowned. "This isn't right. You fed us dinner, breakfast, and lunch and let us stay the night. Consider it my contribution to whatever charity you folks were supporting," James said simply. The bikers looked at each other, then at James. There was a moment of silence before Bear spoke again. "We don't forget kindness like this," he said. "Seriously. Steel Wings Motorcycle Club pays its debts one way or another." James smiled. "No debt. Just humans helping humans." The bikers prepared to leave, putting on their helmets and gloves. Each one thanked James personally. Rosa gave him a hug. Mike, the young one with the red bandana, handed James a Steel Wings patch. "Honorary member," Mike said with a grin. "Not official or anything, but we want you to have it." James took the patch, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. Safe travels." Bear was the last to leave. He stood by his bike, looking back at the diner with its warm lights against the white snow. "You'll be seeing us again, James Cooper," he said. "Count on it." James watched as the bikers rode away, their engines growling in the quiet town. He didn't know what Bear meant, but he had a feeling he would find out soon enough. For now, he had a diner to run. He turned and went back inside, the bell jingling above the door. The day after the bikers left, life at Cooper's Corner returned to normal. The snowplows had cleared most roads, and regular customers began to come back. Many had heard about James helping the stranded bikers. The local newspaper had printed the story with a photo of James standing with Bear and the others in front of the diner. "You're famous now," said Ellie, an older woman who came for breakfast every day. She put the newspaper on the counter, pointing to the article. James smiled but shook his head. "Not famous, just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Ellie said. "Most places closed early that night. You stayed open." James poured her coffee, thinking about the bikers. He wondered where they were now and if they had made it home safely. The Steel Wings patch they had given him was pinned to the bulletin board behind the counter. The rest of the day was busy, with many people coming, and not just for food, but to hear James tell the story about the bikers. By closing time, James was tired of talking about it. He was not someone who liked a lot of attention. The next morning was cold but clear. James arrived at 5 a.m. as usual to prepare for the day. He turned on the lights, started the coffee, and began making fresh biscuits. At 6 a.m., he unlocked the front door and flipped the sign to open. He was wiping down tables when he heard it, the distant sound of motorcycle engines. At first, he thought he was imagining it. It was too early and still too cold for most bikers to be out riding. But the sound grew louder. James walked to the front window. What he saw made him freeze in place. Coming down the main street was a line of motorcycles. Not just a few, dozens of them. The line stretched so far that he couldn't see the end of it. The first riders pulled into his parking lot. James recognized Bear at the front, his big bike gleaming in the early morning light. Behind him came more and more motorcycles, filling the parking lot and then lining up along the street on both sides. James stepped outside, his breath making clouds in the cold air. Bear walked up to him, a huge smile on his face. "Told you we'd see you again," Bear said, extending his hand. James shook it, still shocked. "What is all this?" "Word travels fast in our community," Bear explained. "After we got home, I posted about what you did for us on our club's social media. Other clubs saw it, and they wanted to show their appreciation too. Some rode all night to get here." James looked at the long line of motorcycles. There must have been over 100 riders, men and women of all ages. They were taking off helmets, adjusting jackets, looking toward the diner with friendly faces. "This is too much," James said, feeling overwhelmed. Bear put a hand on his shoulder. "You helped strangers in need without question. That means something to people like us. We came to say thank you and to eat the best breakfast around if you're serving. James looked at his small diner, then at the crowd of bikers. I don't have enough seats for everyone. We'll take turns, Bear said. Some can eat while others wait. We're in no hurry. Inside, James called his two waitresses, Martha and Louisa, who normally didn't come in until 7 a.m. I need help, he told them, and called Joe and asked if he can come in early to help in the kitchen. By 6:30 a.m., the diner was full of bikers. Every seat was taken and more waited outside. James, Martha, Louisa, and Joe worked faster than they ever had before. Plates of eggs, bacon, pancakes, and biscuits flew out of the kitchen. The coffee machine ran nonstop. The bikers were polite and patient. They talked and laughed, creating a warm atmosphere despite the cold morning outside. Many came up to James to shake his hand or pat him on the back. They all had the same message: thank you for helping our friends. A woman with long silver hair and a leather vest covered in patches approached the counter where James was pouring coffee. I'm Lisa, she said, president of the Road Queens MC from 2 counties over. What you did matters to all of us. Most people see our leather and bikes and judge us before knowing us. James nodded. My grandmother always said, don't judge a book by its cover. She was right about most things. As the morning went on, more bikers arrived. The line now stretched all the way down Main Street. Local people came out of their homes and businesses to see what was happening. Some took pictures. Others just watched in amazement. The town sheriff, a tall woman named Diana, came into the diner. She looked concerned at first, but relaxed when she saw the orderly scene. Everything okay here, James? She asked. Everything's fine, James assured her. Just a lot of hungry customers. The sheriff looked around at the bikers, then back at James. Heard about what you did during the storm. Good man. She took a seat at the counter. Since I'm here, might as well have some coffee. By noon, hundreds of bikers had come through Cooper's Corner. The tiny kitchen had served more meals in one morning than it usually did in a week. James had run out of nearly everything. Bear, who had stayed to help manage the crowds, approached James. We should probably wrap this up. You're running out of food, and some of these folks have long rides home. James nodded gratefully. He was exhausted, but also touched by what had happened. Thank you, Bear. This was unexpected, Bear grinned. That's the point. Unexpected kindness deserves unexpected thanks. Outside, the bikers who had already eaten were preparing to leave. But before they did, something unusual happened. One by one, they walked up to the diner's door and left something on a table that had been set up there. Business cards, club patches, small donations for James's next charity project, and handwritten thank you notes. A man in his 60s, with a gray beard and weathered face, handed James a wooden plaque. It was hand-carved with the words, Friend of the Road, Cooper's Corner. Made this last night, the man said simply. Hang it where people can see it. Any biker who comes through will know this is a safe place. As the afternoon continued, the bikers began to leave in groups. They revved their engines in salute as they rode past the diner. The sound echoed through the small town, turning heads and drawing more attention to Cooper's Corner. Local news reporters had arrived, attracted by the unusual gathering. They interviewed James, asking why all these bikers had come. They came to say thank you, James explained, tired but smiling. For what? A reporter asked. For treating them like people, James said. That's all any of us want, I guess. By evening, most of the bikers had gone. Bear and a few others from the original group stayed to help clean up. The diner looked like it had been through a whirlwind. Every napkin used, every coffee mug dirty, every surface needing cleaning. Sorry about the mess, Bear said as he stacked chairs. James shook his head. Small price to pay for a day like this. When everything was finally clean, Bear and his friends prepared to leave. The Steel Wings members stood in front of the diner for one last photo with James in the center. This isn't the end, Bear told James. You've got friends now in places you didn't even know existed. As they rode away, James stood in the doorway of his diner, the Friend of the Road plaque in his hands. He thought about how one small decision, to stay open during a snowstorm, had led to all of this. Inside, he hung the plaque next to the gear register where everyone could see it. Then he sat down for the first time all day, looked around his empty diner and smiled. Tomorrow would be another day, and who knew what it might bring. 2 weeks had passed since the day hundreds of bikers came to Cooper's Corner. The excitement had died down, but things were not the same for James or his diner. Business was better than ever. People from neighboring towns drove to Pineville just to eat at the diner that had been in the news. James had to hire 2 more staff members to handle the extra customers. The wall next to the cash register was now covered with patches, pins, and photos from various motorcycle clubs. The Friend of the Road plaque hung in the center. James had also started a bulletin board where travelers could leave messages for other riders who might stop by. It was a Tuesday morning when Mayor Wilson came into the diner. He was a short man with a round face who always wore a tie, even on weekends. He took a seat at the counter and ordered his usual black coffee and wheat toast. "James," the mayor said after taking a sip of coffee, "the town council had a meeting last night. We talked about you and what happened with those bikers." James wiped the counter, not looking up. "Is there a problem?" "Problem? No, quite the opposite," Mayor Wilson said. "Tourism is up 30% since your story hit the news. People are curious about the diner that bikers love. The town council wants to honor you at our next meeting." James frowned. He didn't like being the center of attention. "That's not necessary, Mayor. I was just helping people who needed it." "That's exactly why we want to honor you," the mayor insisted. "You showed the best of what Pineville stands for. We're thinking of making the last Saturday in January Cooper's Corner Day. What do you think?" Before James could answer, the door opened. A delivery man entered carrying a large package. "Delivery for James Cooper," he announced. James signed for the package and placed it on the counter. It was wrapped in brown paper with a Steel Wings MC sticker on the side. There was a note attached. "Aren't you going to open it?" Mayor Wilson asked, curious. James opened the note first. It was from Bear. "James, here's a little something from all of us. Look for it on the walls of bike shops and clubhouses across the country. Your family now. Bear and the Steel Wings MC." Intrigued, James carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a framed poster. The image showed Cooper's Corner Diner with motorcycles parked outside. Across the top were the words, "Respect the road, respect each other." At the bottom, the story of Cooper's Corner, where kindness has no limits. "Well, I'll be," Mayor Wilson said, adjusting his glasses to see better. "They made you famous." James stared at the poster, not sure how to feel. He had never wanted fame or recognition. He had just done what felt right that snowy night. Later that day, James received a call from a motorcycle magazine. They wanted to interview him for a feature story. The next day, a travel blogger came to the diner to do a review. By the end of the week, a TV crew from a national morning show had contacted him. James tried to keep his life normal despite all the attention. He still arrived at 5 a.m. every day. He still made the same food his father and grandmother had taught him to cook. He still treated every customer with respect, whether they came on a motorcycle or in a minivan. But some things were changing. The diner's walls were now filling with photos of bikers who had traveled from all over the country just to eat at Cooper's Corner. James kept a guest book by the door, which was quickly filling with names and hometowns, some from as far away as Alaska and Florida. 1 month after the snowstorm, James received another surprise. A letter arrived from the Steel Wings MC headquarters in the state capital. It was an invitation to their annual charity event, where they raised money for children's hospitals. The letter said they wanted to honor him as their special guest. James wasn't sure about going. He had never left the diner for more than a day since his father died. But Martha, his longest-serving waitress, convinced him. "You need to go," she said firmly. "Joe and I can handle things here. Besides, they're raising money for sick children. How can you say no to that?" James finally agreed. The event was that Saturday, about 2 hours away by car. Since James didn't like to drive long distances, Bear arranged for a biker named Thomas to pick him up. Thomas arrived early Saturday morning on a shiny blue motorcycle with a sidecar. "Your chariot awaits," he said with a grin. James had never ridden in a motorcycle sidecar before. He climbed in nervously, holding tightly to his seat as they pulled away from the diner. But soon he began to enjoy the ride. The fresh air on his face, the beautiful countryside rolling by, the friendly waves from other bikers they passed. The charity event was held at a large fairground. When James and Thomas arrived, hundreds of motorcycles were already parked in neat rows. A stage had been set up, with bands playing music. Food vendors lined one side, and various games and activities filled the grounds. Children ran around, laughing, many of them wearing hospital bracelets, the very kids this event was supporting. Bear spotted James and came over to greet him. "You made it. Come on, there are a lot of people who want to meet you." For the next hour, James was introduced to bikers from clubs he had never heard of. They all knew his story. Many showed him the poster of Cooper's Corner that now hung in their clubhouses. At noon, Bear led James to the stage. A crowd gathered around as Bear took the microphone. "Most of you know the story," Bear began. "During the worst snowstorm in 20 years, when most businesses closed their doors, one man stayed open. He gave shelter to 10 strangers on motorcycles. He fed us, let us sleep in his diner, and asked for nothing in return. That man is James Cooper." The crowd cheered as James reluctantly joined Bear on stage. "What you might not know," Bear continued, "is that James lost his father 5 years ago. His father helped him build that diner from nothing. Together they created a place where everyone is welcome, no matter what they look like or what they ride." James felt a lump in his throat as Bear talked about his father. How did Bear know these details? "So today," Bear said, "in honor of James Cooper and his father, the Steel Wings MC is proud to announce that all proceeds from this year's event will go to the Children's Hospital Building Fund, and the new wing will be named Cooper's Corner Children's Wing." The crowd erupted in applause. James stood in shock as Bear handed him a large check made out to the hospital. The amount was more money than James had ever seen, $75,000. "I can't accept this," James whispered to Bear. "It's not for you," Bear replied. "It's because of you. There's a difference." When the applause finally died down, James stepped up to the microphone. He rarely spoke to crowds, but he felt he needed to say something. "My father used to tell me, 'What goes around comes around,'" James said simply. "I never really understood what he meant until now. Thank you all for turning a small act of kindness into something that will help so many children." As he stepped down from the stage, a little girl in a wheelchair rolled up to him. She wore a hospital bracelet and had a Steel Wing sticker on her chair. "Are you the diner man?" she asked, looking up at James with big eyes. James knelt down to her level. "Yes, I am." She handed him a crayon drawing of a diner with motorcycles, parked outside. "Thank you for helping the bikers," she said. "They helped me too." James carefully took the drawing, knowing it was the most precious gift he had received yet. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hope," the girl replied with a smile. Hope. It seemed fitting. James looked around at the bikers, the families, the children. They were helping, all because he had decided to keep his diner open during a snowstorm. "It's very nice to meet you, Hope," James said, holding the drawing close. "Very nice indeed." 1 year had passed since the snowstorm that changed everything for James Cooper and his diner. Cooper's Corner had become a landmark, not just in Pineville, but throughout the biking community across the state and beyond. It was the anniversary of that fateful night, and James stood behind the counter, looking at how much had changed. The walls were now covered with photos, patches, and mementos from motorcycle clubs from all over the country. The guest book by the door had been filled and replaced 3 times. The Friend of the Road plaque still hung in its place of honor, polished and prominent. Outside, the diner looked different too. The parking lot had been expanded to accommodate more motorcycles. A covered patio had been added for outdoor seating, in good weather. Even the sign had been updated with the Steel Wings logo added next to the diner's name, but the biggest change was inside the diner itself. Photos of James's father still hung on the walls, but now they were joined by new pictures. James with Bear and the original 10 bikers, James at the charity event, and most prominently, James standing in front of the new Cooper's Corner Children's Wing at the state hospital. The wing had opened 3 months ago, and already it had helped hundreds of children. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Martha asked, interrupting James's reflection. She had been with him the longest of all his staff, through good times and bad. "Just thinking about how much has changed," James replied. "My father would never believe it." "He'd be proud," Martha said, patting his arm. "Very proud." The bell above the door jingled, and a family walked in, a couple with 2 small children. James recognized the little girl immediately. It was Hope, the child from the charity event who had given him the crayon drawing. Her drawing now hung in a frame next to the cash register. "Hope," James called out, smiling. "How are you doing?" Hope looked much healthier than she had a year ago. Her cheeks were fuller, her eyes brighter. She walked with a cane now instead of using a wheelchair. "Mr. Cooper," she exclaimed. "We came to see you." Hope's parents introduced themselves. Her father, Michael, shook James's hand firmly. "We wanted to come in person," Michael said. "Hope finished her treatment at the Cooper's Corner wing last month. The doctors say she's going to be fine." James felt a lump in his throat. "That's the best news I've heard all day," he said, his voice a little rough with emotion. They took a seat in a booth, and James brought them menus. Hope showed James her scrapbook of her time in the hospital, including pictures of the playroom in the new wing and the mural of motorcycles that decorated the hallway. "Bear visits us every week," Hope told James. "He brings toys for all the kids." James wasn't surprised. He had learned over the past year that the tough-looking biker had the softest heart of anyone he knew. As James brought food to Hope's family, he noticed more motorcycles pulling into the parking lot. This wasn't unusual anymore. Bikers stopped by every day. But he recognized these bikes. The original Steel Wings members who had been stranded in the snowstorm had arrived. Bear entered first, followed by Rosa, Mike, and the others. They greeted James with hugs and handshakes like the old friends they had become. "We couldn't miss the anniversary," Bear explained. "1 year since you saved our frozen behinds." James laughed. "I didn't save anyone. I just opened my door." "Sometimes," Rosa said softly, "that's all the saving people need." They had brought something with them, a large wrapped item that took 2 of them to carry. They set it on an empty table. "What's this?" James asked. "Open it and see," Bear replied with a grin. James carefully removed the wrapping to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden sign. It showed a motorcycle in front of a diner carved in rich detail. Below the image were words carved in elegant letters: "Cooper's Corner, where strangers become family. Established 1983, reborn 2020. For the front of the diner, Bear explained, "Your father's sign is getting a bit weathered." James ran his fingers over the carved wood, feeling the craftsmanship. "Did you make this?" "Mike did," Bear said, clapping the younger biker on the shoulder. "Turns out he's a talented woodworker when he's not riding his bike." Mike blushed slightly. "It's nothing much. Just wanted you to have something special for the anniversary." Before James could thank them properly, more motorcycles arrived. Then cars began pulling up. People from town started walking in. It seemed word had spread about the anniversary. Mayor Wilson arrived wearing his usual tie, but also a leather vest over his shirt, a new look for him. "Hope I'm not late," he said. "Wouldn't miss Cooper's Corner Day." The mayor had kept his promise. The town had officially declared the anniversary of the snowstorm as Cooper's Corner Day in Pineville. There was even a small parade planned for later. As more people arrived, the diner quickly filled beyond capacity. People spilled out onto the patio and into the parking lot. Someone set up speakers outside, and music played. Food was passed around, not just from the diner's kitchen, but brought by townspeople who wanted to contribute. In the midst of the growing celebration, a news van pulled up. A reporter James recognized from the state news channel approached him with a microphone. "Mr. Cooper, can you tell our viewers what today means to you?" she asked. James had become better at talking to reporters over the past year, but he still felt uncomfortable with the attention. He looked around at the gathered crowd, bikers in leather, families with children, townspeople he had known his whole life, and strangers who had traveled just to be here. "It means that small actions matter," he said finally. "My father used to say that kindness costs nothing but means everything. I never realized how right he was until a year ago." The celebration continued throughout the day. Stories were shared, food was eaten, and friendships were strengthened. As evening approached, Bear called for everyone's attention. He stood on a chair so all could see him. "A year ago," Bear began, 10 cold bikers found shelter in this diner because one man chose to stay open during a storm. None of us knew then what would come from that night. A children's hospital wing that has already helped hundreds of kids. A community that has come together across differences, and countless travelers who have found a welcome place on the road. Bear raised his coffee mug high. "To James Cooper and Cooper's Corner," the crowd echoed. "To James Cooper and Cooper's Corner." James stood surrounded by friends old and new, overwhelmed by how much had changed in a year. He thought about his father and grandmother, and the lessons they had taught him about treating people right. He thought about that snowy night and how close he had come to closing early. One small decision had led to all of this. As the sun began to set, Hope approached James again. She held out her hand, offering him something small and shiny. "I made this for you," she said. It was a keychain with a small metal plate. Engraved on it were simple words. "Thank you for keeping your door open." James closed his fingers around the keychain, feeling its weight in his palm. "Thank you, Hope," he said. "I always will." And he knew, looking around at all the lives touched by one night's kindness, that he would indeed keep his door open. Not just the physical door to his diner, but the door to his heart as well. Because sometimes the smallest action, the simplest kindness, can create ripples that change the world.